Okay, we've got to find the function of the underlined text. Let's read the whole passage here. It's at the end. We'll try to figure out what's going on. It's part of a colon. So part of what it's going to do is explain or give an example of. Explains, clarifies, contrasts, describes. Well, that could be 2 or 3 of those. So let's go ahead and read it. Horizontal gene transfer occurs when an organism of one species acquires genetic material from another organism species through non-reproductive means. Okay, so they get genes from one animal to another without reproduction. Okay, let's sort of keep that as the definition. The genetic material can then be transferred vertically in the second species, so then they can reproduce and continue that genes. That is through reproductive inheritance, of course, okay? So scientists such and such and her team have hypothesized infection by invertebrate parasites as a mechanism of horizontal gene transfer between vertebrate species. So in other words, or an example of that, while feeding, a parasite could acquire a gene from one host, then relocate to a host from a different vertebrate species and transfer the gene to it in turn. So this is explaining or defining what the horizontal gene transfer is for a parasite. So it explains why parasites are less susceptible to horizontal gene transfer. No, it's nothing about more or less, no comparison, and there's no explanation of why. That's wrong. Okay. B, it clarifies why some genes are more likely to be transferred. Again, why and comparison. That's wrong. That's not really the information in this passage. It's just defining and telling you what horizontal gene transfer is. Not whether it's more likely, not why it's happening. Okay? So we want to figure out what this sentence is doing, and it's explaining. It contrasts how horizontal gene transfer occurs among vertebrates with how it occurs among invertebrates. No, there's no comparison of vertebrates to invertebrates here. So that's not right. That's not going to be correct, okay? It does mention an invertebrate parasite delivering to vertebrates, but it's not a comparison, so that's not right. It describes a means by which horizontal genes transfer might occur among vertebrates. Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly what it does. It's defining or telling you, here's an example of how the horizontal gene transfer could occur. Okay, and it's their hypothesis, so it's definitely a might, and it's among vertebrates, right? You know, the transfer might be coming from an invertebrate, but it's among vertebrates. That's the right sort of topic. D is correct. Okay, we've got a function of the underlined sentence in the overall structure. So the following text is Herman Melville's 1854 novel, The Lightning Rod Man. The stranger still stood in the exact middle of the cottage, where he had first planted himself. His singularity impelled a closer scrutiny. So his singularity, something special or unique about him, led you to look at him or scrutinize him more closely. Why? Don't really know yet. I mean, he's just standing in the middle of the cottage where he first planted himself. A lean, gloomy figure, hair dark and lank, mattedly streaked over his brow. His sunken pitfalls of eyes were ringed by indigo halos and played with innocuous sort of lightning. The gleam without the bolt, the whole man was dripping. He stood in a puddle of the bare oak floor, his strange walking stick vertically resting at his side. So this is basically the underlined section is identifying or pointing out that there's something really unique about this guy worth looking at, and then it goes on to describe him. So it elaborates on the previous sentence's description of the character. No, the previous sentence does not describe the character. It just says he stands in the middle of the cottage. I keep wanting to say college, not cottage. Have no idea why, but okay. B, it introduces the setting that is described in the sentences that follow. Not really. The setting was the first sentence. It's just saying he needs closer scrutiny. I'm not going to eliminate that yet, but that doesn't sound quite right. It establishes a contrast with the description in the previous sentence. There's no description in the previous sentence that's contrasting this. It sets up the character description presented in the sentence that follows. That's exactly it. That's the right answer. D is the answer. So it sets it up. He's standing there. He's unique. His singularity requires or compels a scrutiny or a closer look. And then we get the description. We kind of understand why. He's described kind of like lightning, which is maybe why he's the lightning rod man. Never read that text, but I suppose that's what it is. D. Okay, we've got a function of the underlying text again. It follows a colon, so there's a good chance it's going to explain or provide a list of, elaborates, describes, identifies, explains. Unfortunately, the verbs that begin the sentences, they usually kind of talk about explaining, elaborating. There are two or three that could work. It doesn't often help too much. So let's go ahead, as always, read the full passage or paragraph. Part of the Atacama Desert in Peru has surprisingly rich plant life despite receiving almost no rainfall. Okay, so that's pretty interesting. We've got a desert that has a lot of plants, even though there's no rain. Moisture from winter fog sustains plants once they're growing, but the soil's tough crust makes it hard for seeds to germinate in the first place. Okay, so it's really hard for them to grow, but once they grow, apparently there's a lot of moisture in the air. Local birds that dig nests in the ground seem to be of help. They churn the soil, exposing buried seeds to moisture and nutrients. Okay, so what's this text doing? It's pointing out or explaining how birds help these difficult growing conditions for the seeds of the plants occur in the first place. So that's the function, to show how these plants get to grow. Indeed, such and such found that mounds of soil dug up by birds were far more fertile and supported more seedlings than soil in undisturbed areas. So we have a study that shows that. So it elaborates on the idea that the top layer of Atacama Desert soil forms a tough crust. No, they tell us it has a tough crust. Nothing about top layer versus bottom layer or anything like that. A is wrong. It describes the process by which seeds are deposited into Atacama Desert soil. Not really. It doesn't say how seeds are deposited. Do they float in the air? Do people deposit them? These are descriptions of how they'd be deposited. That's not really described, right? It says churning up the soil helps them, but it's not describing the process by which seeds are deposited. That's not right. C, it identifies the reason. Again, why? Reason not in there. Particular bird species dig nests. This is not even. They churn the soil, exposing buried seeds to moisture and nutrients. That does not indicate anything about the reason the birds are acting. That's wrong, which makes C wrong. D, it explains how certain birds promote seed germination in Atacama Desert soil. Yes, certain birds churn up the soil, and that makes the ground more fertile for difficult growth to actually occur more easily. D is the correct answer. Okay, what best describes the overall structure of the text? This is going to be a function question. Let's take a look. Michelle, such and such, a historian and citizen of Choctaw Nation, has identified a dilemma inherent to research on the status of women in her tribe during the 1600s and 1700s. So here's an explanation of that dilemma. The primary sources from that era, travel narratives and other accounts by male European colonizers, probably not the best source for accurate information about women of a tribe, underestimate the degree of power conferred on Choctaw women by their traditional roles in political, civic, and ceremonial life. Pesuntubi argues that the Choctaw oral tradition and findings from archaeological sites in the tribe's homeland supplement the written record by providing crucial insights into those roles. Okay, so what's the main idea here? We have an historian of a particular tribe, and basically she hypothesized or claims that the main sources of how women fit into society are wrong. And just the reference to the sources kind of tells you they're probably not appropriate sources, European males versus women in that time. And then it indicates different ways in which women exerted their power or degree of power within the society. So that's the function here, to show that unlike previous thoughts or sources, women actually had a lot more power than expected, than previous thought. Okay, A, it details the shortcomings of certain historical sources. Yes, it definitely does that. Then argues that research should avoid, nothing, it doesn't say at the end here that we should avoid those sources. That might seem rational or reasonable, but it's not evidence in the text. So again, correct answers must be evidence, not just possible. B, it describes a problem that arises in research on a particular topic. Maybe. I like the first part of A better. Then sketches a historian's approach to addressing that problem. Doesn't really show her approach. No, it's not really describing a problem per se. It's more of a shortcoming, not a problem. Okay. So C, it lists the advantages of particular research method. Advantages of a research method? Oh, that's wrong there. At least if it's referring to the accounts by travel narratives and European colonizers, that's wrong. Then acknowledges historians' criticism of that method. The disadvantages of a particular method, not the advantages. Okay? That's not right. D, it characterizes a particular topic as especially challenging to research. Especially challenging to research? Then suggests a related topic for historians to pursue. No, it's not doing that. So, we got a problem. I eliminated all of them. Let's go back. We got to sort of start from scratch a little bit again. So it details the shortcomings of certain historical sources. This part I really liked, okay? Then argues that research should avoid those sources. Did I miss that? Did it maybe actually make that argument? So the primary sources, blah, 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 underestimate the degree of power. Rolls Posentubi argues the Choctaw oral tradition findings from archaeological sites supplement the written record by providing crucial insights. So then argues research should avoid those sources altogether. Identified a dilemma inherent to research on the status of women. I don't really see that it does that. Does it argue that research should avoid those sources altogether? I still don't think that's right. Let's check out B. It describes a problem. So a dilemma is a problem. I didn't like that wording, but okay, it does say that a problem that arises in research on a particular topic, inherent to research on this topic, status of women. That is actually pretty accurate to the text. So I didn't like it. It's actually very accurate to the text. Then sketches a historian's approach to addressing that problem. Yes, of course. I don't know why I eliminated that. This is the historian's approach. So she says, use these methods, right? Basically the oral tradition, the written record, the archaeological sites. These are all examples of the different methods or approach the historian should take to addressing that problem. B is clearly the answer. I don't know how I missed that the first time. Okay, which choice best describes the overall structure of the text? Many archaeologists assume that large-scale engineering projects in ancient societies require an elite class to plan and direct the necessary labor. So archaeologists assume large-scale projects required an elite class, meaning I think we're going to get a turn of events that it didn't really. However, here's our contrast. Recent discoveries, such as the excavation of ancient canal near the Gulf Coast of Alabama, have complicated this picture. Here's our opposing evidence. Using radiocarbon dating, a team of researchers concluded that the 1.39 kilometer canal was most likely constructed between 576 and 650 CE by an indigenous society that was relatively free of social classes. So you didn't need a sort of class or tiered society. It could have been, I hate to say it, communist or socialism or some type of community cooperative development that allowed it to be constructed. So, of course, why wouldn't that possibly be the case? So, A, It describes a common view. Well, let's think what's the function here. The function is to say or point out that you don't need tiered elite structures in society to get big projects done, given the example. So, A, it describes a common view among archaeologists. Yes, that apparently is the case, that they thought you needed an elite class, then discusses a recent finding the challenges of that view. This is really good. In fact, that's probably going to be it. Let's just check the others before we circle it. It outlines a method used. Nope, no method here. I don't see any method of how they did their work, what digging they did, no, or discussion of an alternate method. That's wrong. It presents a contradictory conclusions drawn by archaeologists. No. The first part is not a conclusion. This is a claim. Okay? This is, an assumption. It's not a conclusion. Okay? Then evaluates a study that has apparently resolved that contradiction. Nothing says it's resolved. That's not true either. Okay? So this is wrong. C is wrong. D. It identifies a gap in scientific research. Scientific research? Okay, we do say things abstractly in the answers. We go from the concrete text to the abstract in the reading a lot, but this is way too broad. Scientific research, that could be chemistry, biology. This is not what this is about. It's just about an engineering project. Then presents a strategy used by some archaeologists to remedy that gap. There's no strategy mentioned here. D is clearly wrong. So again, a lot of times eliminating can be your best friend. It's the easier approach. Well, I shouldn't say that because we kind of figured out from our prediction that A was the right answer in the beginning. But it does highlight that there are two approaches, kind of two sides of the same coin, that can help you get to the right answer in your procedure. So A is the right answer.